Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for today's video, I'm going to be discussing and talking about one of my all-time favorite authors, Michael Crichton. And for the first part of this video, I'm just going to be giving an overview of my overall Michael Crichton experience. And then sort of the second half of this video, or 2/3, or however I decide to break it up, is going to be my top 10 Michael Crichton books that I've read. I haven't read everything by him yet, but I've read most of them. So like I've said, Michael Crichton is for sure one of my favorite authors of all time. He would easily make my top 10 favorite authors list, but he's an author that I'm often surprised how much I enjoy his works, because typically when I'm reading books, I'm more interested in characters, character development, character arcs, but in his books, they're definitely more plot-driven, they're more idea-driven, they can even be scientifically philosophy-driven. And his characters, while they aren't bad, they can kind of be cardboard cutouts of one another. And what I mean by that is that a lot of the characters in most of his books are basically the same. A lot of the characters, especially the main characters, are basically scientists in one field of study or another that are tasked with a problem, and they have to solve it using some form of scientific knowledge that they have. And that's basically their character arcs throughout the books, and basically all of the books, that's what's happening. So even though his characters aren't spectacular, what keeps me coming back to him time and time again are his plots, are his ideas, and typically that's not what I go for in books. But with Michael Crichton, for some reason, he just has an act of just, his books are very bingeable because of his plots and because of his ideas. And his writing style is definitely immersive. When you read one of his books, you feel like you're actually there, and you feel like you've actually gotten a pretty good grasp on what these characters or these scientist characters are actually trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish. And that's an aspect of Michael Crichton that I really admire and appreciate, is that he's not writing the same plots over and over again. He's not using the same settings over and over again. He's doing that with characters to some extent, like I said, but all of his books are just so diverse in their settings and their ideas. You've got books that are in the ocean, you've got books that are in the jungle, you've got books that are in the city, you've got books that are in like a scientific lab, you've got books that take place on a pirate ship, you've got books that take place in the desert, like just all over the map with Michael Crichton. Another huge reason why I love Michael Crichton and love going back to him is that most of his books are standalones, whereas a lot of the books that I like to read, especially for fantasy, are series, and I've started way too many series that I have to finish, but I know if I pick up a Michael Crichton book, it'll just be a standalone most of the time, and I can just read a complete story and enjoy it for what it is. And I've read a fair amount of Michael Crichton at this point in my life, and really the only book that I really did not like, that I flat out basically hated, was Eaters of the Dead. I did not like that book. I believe I gave it 1.5 stars. And that's a complete outlier for Michael Crichton, because most of the time I'm giving his books at least 3 stars. Most of the time they're getting like 4.5 stars, but that was the only book I did not enjoy at all. But on the flip side, while I do enjoy most of his books, there's not a lot of them that I would consider like all-time favorite books. Books that I would put either in my top 10 or my top 20, my top 25. He's just a very solid author, very reliable, that I can go back to again and again and expect good things from him. All of his books are also page turners. They're very addictive, they're very bingeable, and I love them for that. So with saying all of that, my general thoughts on Michael Crichton, let's go into my top 10 Michael Crichton books. Let's jump right into it. So unlike all of my other top 10 lists, these books aren't going to be in any kind of order, except for the last 3 books, which are by far my favorite Michael Crichton books. These first 7 books, they're basically all 4-star books, and they're really hard to kind of put in any kind of order. Just, these are my favorites, and I'm going to save my favorites, my 3 favorites, for last. And I'll go ahead and start off this list with a bit of a surprise because it's a lot of people's favorite Michael Crichton books. I love it, but it's not quite my favorite, and that would be Jurassic Park. Obviously, it's very beloved, and again, a lot of people's favorite Michael Crichton book. It's a lot of people's entry into Michael Crichton, for one thing. It wasn't quite for me. I think it was like the 2nd or 3rd Michael Crichton book I read. But, it was still great. I think I gave it around 4 stars. The main reason why it's not one of my favorites is simply, the movie. I love the movie. I watched it a bunch when I was a kid, and I can still enjoy it now. And if I want to enjoy the story in a more timely fashion, I'll just go watch the movie. I love the movie. I think I love the movie better than the book, and that's kind of a contention between Michael Crichton fans, like whether the movie or the book is better. I personally think the movie is better. That's not to say that the book is bad by any means. I still love the book. And I wanted to just mention this book right up the top, just so people know that it's not in my top 3 and they're not anticipating it. Not in my top 3, but it's in my top 10. If I had to pick a least favorite book from my top 10 favorite Michael Crichton books, it would probably be this one, and that would be Next. It is a great book. It's very fast-paced, and it's actually a very funny book. It's very hilarious at times, and also it's very underrated. Not a lot of people have picked this book up, and I think the main reason, or the main 2 reasons, is that it's one of his newer books. It was one of the books he wrote, right before he passed away. Another reason is that it's one of his books that does not have an adaptation, so it's very underrated for that reason. I had a few issues with the book, and it's issues that I usually come across with Michael Crichton, mainly to do with characters and a little bit of pacing issues. But other than that, it's just a very fun book. It's very funny. It's very fast-paced, and oh yeah, I guess I should say what the book is about. That would probably help. It's about genetic engineering. And Crichton definitely has some fun with the whole genetic engineering and the possibilities and the bad roads that you can go down when you start tampering with nature. It's basically that kind of book. So yeah, if you haven't read it or haven't heard of it, I would definitely recommend it. Maybe not the first Michael Crichton book you should read, but once you start getting used to his writing style, I think you should check this one out. And yeah, it's great. The next book I'll talk about is one called Airframe. It's also one of his newer books. I think it was written in the early 2000s. It's basically about this plane that has to be crash landed by a pilot, and it's these group of people that have to investigate just exactly what happened and why it happened. Another thing that I forgot to mention when it comes to Michael Crichton's books, or a lot of his books, is that a lot of them take place in such a short amount of time. A lot of the times they're only 3, 4, 5 days, which makes it incredibly fast-paced. This whole book takes place in 5 days, and they're really trying to figure out what the hell happened to this plane, and kind of the whole thing it's basically a mystery. And the resolution to the mystery and the climax of the book is definitely the main reason why this is in my top 10 list. Again, I feel like this is definitely underrated. Not a lot of people have read it. If you haven't and you're a big Michael Crichton fan, please go check it out. This next book is definitely one of his older books, and it was written, I believe, in the late 60s, and that would be The Andromeda Strain. And even though this book was written in the late 60s, I believe it ages very well, and it's also very timely because it's ultimately about this super deadly virus. And of course, there's a group of people tasked with trying to figure out what is going on, how to contain this virus, and ultimately how to stop it from spreading. And a big draw for a lot of Michael Crichton readers is the amount of sheer research and information that Michael Crichton can jam-pack into these books. And even though it's written in the late 60s, there's actually a lot of interesting computer stuff in here, which you don't often, connect with, the 60s, which I think was pretty cool. This book does have a sequel that came out either 1 or 2 years ago. I won't be reading it though because it was in no way, shape, or form written by Michael Crichton. It's basically just has the same name, except they call it the Andromeda Evolution, I believe. But it's written by someone completely different, and I really don't have any kind of desire to read it. This book, on the other hand, The Andromeda Strain, is terrific, and I think it's a must-read for Michael Crichton fans. This next book is definitely different than the rest of these books, and it's because while it is written by Michael Crichton, it's written under a different pseudonym, and that would be Binary by John Lang, aka Michael Crichton. For anyone who doesn't know, Michael Crichton wrote under a few pseudonyms, one of them being John Lang, and he wrote about 8 or 9 John Lang books in the late 60s, early 70s, while he was studying at Harvard, of all places. He did this during his downtime. And I've read a few John Lang books. Most of them are okay or mediocre, but this one was actually very good, and that's why it's on the list. I'll read the little synopsis on the back because it pretty much sums up what the book is. When a government computer is hacked and a high-security shipment of nerve gas gets hijacked, Graves puts the pieces together, but can he stop Wright from unleashing his weapon before it kills 1 million people, including the president? It's very short, very fast-paced, and just an overall very fun book to read. And the ending is pretty good. Another one of my favorite Michael Crichton books of all time would be The Terminal Man. It's about this guy who has very violent seizures, and he goes to a neuropsychiatrist who basically suggests that he goes through with this surgery, and the surgery is supposed to cure him, essentially. The surgery will implant electrodes deep in his brain that kind of soothe him and that stop these seizures from happening. And they work at first until they don't, and then a lot of crazy stuff happens. I read this book at a time when I was very much interested in psychology. For those who don't know, I actually have a degree in psychology that I never use. And I read this book when I was in college, studying psychology, taking a lot of psychology classes, and this book was definitely up my alley. And like I've said with a lot of Michael Crichton books, it's short, very fast-paced, and very hard to put down. Definitely one of my all-time favorite Crichton books. Before I get to my all-time top 3 Michael Crichton books, the last book I have to talk about is Prey. If I were to give my top 3 Michael Crichton books all 5 stars, or at least very close to being 5 stars, this book would be probably about 4.5 stars. It was super good. Again, it's one of his newer books, and it's a little underrated. People do know about it, especially, Michael Crichton fans. I will say it's one of the rare Michael Crichton books where the plot is pretty good, but actually I did enjoy the characters in this book. And for those who don't know, this book is all about nanoparticles, and I don't know if you can tell, all of these little black dots are basically little tiny micro robots. And the problem with this book is that, these people created it and they start to swarm, and they kind of start to have maybe sort of a mind of their own, and bad things start happening, and these people are tasked with trying to stop them. It's such a cool idea, such a good premise, and I feel like I'm a broken record when I come to Michael Crichton's work because, like I said, very fast-paced, very bingeable, and just very good. And I would say that for anyone new to Michael Crichton, this would actually be a pretty good modern book to read by him. And it's also one of the books that doesn't have an adaptation from him. And it's always fun to jump into a book not knowing exactly what's going to happen. So yeah, that is Prey, one of my all-time favorite Michael Crichton books. Alright, now we're getting into my top 3 Michael Crichton books. And it's very hard to pick an order because literally they're so different. Like, I'm looking at them right now. They're such different books. Such completely different premises. But if I had to choose, I'll go with number 3 being Disclosure. Another great thing about Michael Crichton is that he gets you to suspend your disbelief entirely. Even though a lot of what happens in his books, they feel believable because he has all of this research to kind of back up what he's saying, you still have to suspend your belief a little bit. But with this book, it's definitely one of his more realistic premises. The main technology he's working with here is basically just computer technology, and this is all, I think, in the early 90s, so it's a little outdated by today's standards. But in reality, the main plot of the book, what drives the book forward, is this sort of reverse sexual harassment that is going on. At the start of the book, there's these 2 people who are kind of vying to get promoted, and the guy, the main character, doesn't get promoted, and someone else gets promoted, and he does not like that. And he goes to meet with the woman who he actually has had a previous relationship with. He goes to meet with her to kind of talk about what's going on. And during that meeting, which takes place in her office at night, she kind of makes an advance on him, a sexual advance. And it's definitely unwanted, and things kind of happen, and he basically just says, look, I do not want to have sex with you, so get out of here. Or I guess actually it's in her office, so he gets out of there. Either way, the next day, chaos ensues when she files a lawsuit, a sexual harassment lawsuit, against him, even though he clearly did not do anything wrong. And basically the whole book is him trying to figure out how exactly to get out of this situation, because it does not look good for him. And again, it's one of those books that takes place in between just a very short amount of time. I think this book takes place in 4 or 5 days, and just him having to come up with the solution before he's inevitably let go by the company is very gripping. And of course, with a lot of Michael Crichton books, the technology in the book that's the main focus is usually used as a solution to the problem. And like I said, this book deals a lot with computer technology in the early 90s, and, that might have something to do with the solution. And I've said before that Michael Crichton isn't necessarily good with character work, but the characters in here are very memorable, they're very good, and there's definitely good character development in this one. And it has a pretty good adaptation too, and it's pretty faithful. It's like a 2-hour movie, and they basically hit all of the main points that are in this book. So for sure, this is definitely one of my all-time favorite Michael Crichton books, and for this video, I have it at number 3. And these next 2 books, man, they're so hard to choose. They could not be more different. I'm sorry, but oh my god. Here's what I'll do. I'll hold both of them up just to let you know what they are, and then at the end of the video, I'll decide. But you've got Sphere and Dragon Teeth. This one takes place underwater in the ocean, and this is a Western that takes place in the West. This takes place in the 1980s, this takes place in the 1880s. How the hell am I supposed to choose one over the other? They're so different and they're both so good. How? And I like them both for such different reasons too. Like this one is definitely more science-based and it's way more out there than even a lot of other Michael Crichton books. He gets really kind of weird in this book. And on top of that, the characters are all good. It's basically a group of scientists and they're all in different fields and they use all of their different fields to try to figure out what's going on and to try to come up with a solution. And in this book, it's basically just a Western adventure story that's really good. And even though this is a relatively new book, this came out only a few years ago. This actually came out after his death. This book was actually written a long time ago and he never published it, and it came out after his death. But this book is just so much fun, and I flew through this book. I read it in one sitting. They're both 5-star books, and I really am struggling here to pick one. Gun to my head, I would probably choose Sphere, just because I've never quite read anything like it. And just, the ending to this book is great, and it's actually a Michael Crichton book that has both a great plot and scientific inquiry and great characters. And that's hard to come by. But man, if I just want to have a fun time with the book, I'm going to read Dragon Teeth. And both of these books are definitely going to be books that I reread a lot when I get older. So yeah, that's my Michael Crichton video, my overview of my experience reading his books, and just my top 10 favorite Michael Crichton books of all time, including my top 3, which was very hard to choose which one was my favorite, but I ended up going with Sphere. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books or if you're interested in them. What are your favorite and least favorite Michael Crichton books that you've read? Let me know down in the comments. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching and have a terrific day.